either can be monetized or you can make different trade-offs. But it has to be built on top of this core infrastructure because there's just some type of data that is too important to assume any kind of additional risk if we want the world to run on blockchain.
And then
It's got to
we
be more than just asset transfers. Um,
right.
yeah, so I think that's kind of where this kind of shift in thinking to interoperability as core infrastructure. This is slowly happening. We're not 100% there yet, but that's the direction.
No, what you said gives me something to think about. You mentioned how, the interoperability core should be perhaps something that people should look at as a non-profit making and, build products on top of that. I think that is perhaps the way to go if we do want to, onboard and make all of these chains talk to each other properly and create a cohesive ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also other benefits that I see from having this type of um, approach to building because as we continue to talk about mainstream adoption, it's inevitable that we have to, broach the topic of regulation.
Right.
Enterprises, when we talk mainstream adoption, it's almost code for for governments and
Yeah.
enterprises, coming on board, and then the masses can follow the products that are being offered. But right now, without these type of standards, where all the different interoperability companies out there are just building ad hoc products. Like I mentioned, everything's customized, everything's, vastly different from one another. It's really near impossible for regulators to kind of get a hold or a handle on things and really kind of understand the risk profiles of each. It's just too big a task. So once you have these universal standards in place, I think it has this additional benefit of kind of assisting both the regulators and the enterprises to kind of comprehend the technical intricacies. And then it'll be more feasible for them to develop kind of a fair and informed regulatory framework, where even if it's tiered, interoperability,
Hmm.
I understand there's different mechanisms in place and there's room for all of them, but at least having kind of standards for each will make it easier for people who aren't in interoperability 24/7 to really get a handle of it. And then once,
Yeah.
regulators are saying, okay, here's the guidelines, here's how things should be, then I think it opens the doors for enterprises to kind of take that next step and therefore mainstream adoption.
Right. You mentioned a couple of things, but I'll talk a little about the regulation aspect. There are obviously quite a few builders who don't believe regulation is the answer in this space because they feel it goes against the very ethos of decentralization, and policymakers more often than not do not understand the technology well enough to be able to create regulations that would be relevant, and also be perhaps by the time those regulations come into play, the technology itself, because it's so dynamic, it has changed, and that they kind of render those policies a little obsolete and moot. And then obviously there is an entire section of builders who believe that for mass adoption to happen, regulations do need to come in, and regulators need to have a part to play here. So because you've kind of already given your opinion, but what do you feel about the other side and people on the other side of the fence who feel that regulation is not perhaps the way to go, and the concerns that I've just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, definitely from the earliest days, there's this ethos, and it
Right.
was definitely attractive to a lot of people who joined early, and I think that's fine. If we go as an industry totally in that direction,
Hmm.
I think then we just give up on widespread adoption. We
Okay.
remain in kind of niche applications. It could still be
Okay.
worth billions of dollars, but still relatively niche in the grand scheme of things.
Hmm.
But if we want the whole world to run on blockchain, then regulation is inevitable. There are too
Right.
many parties, major enterprises that simply will not proceed without clear regulatory guidelines because we see how awful it is right now when there isn't clear
Yeah.
regulatory guidelines and everything is kind of chaos.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And as long as that remains the case, it's a huge impediment to mainstream adoption. So I do think that we as an industry are kind of at, it's not the end of the line, but
Hmm.
the lines are being drawn in the sand. I think the bulk are going to welcome regulation that is
Hmm.
fair and well informed, and there'll be a small subsection that will take a hard line and say, regulation has no place, and they'll follow
Right.
kind of that philosophy. Us, definitely, we're welcoming regulation. We want the industry to grow, and we think it's a necessity. And
Hmm.
I think you rightfully pointed out that a lot of the problem with regulation is that it is ill-informed about,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to kind of technical complexities. So
Right.
that's kind of tying back into what I was saying before. Right now, it's impossible for the regulators, to have a profound understanding of the technical complexities because the system itself is so fractured and everyone's doing things differently. It's essentially impossible to properly regulate on the interoperability side of things, at least. And so having these types of shared standards wherein things are already vetted for security. So, okay, we for this example, we assume that it is secure enough to proceed. And then, com- you know, together we can in, you know, educate the regulators about, okay, here's the different components, here's how
Hmm.
they need to be built to have a good balance between, decentralization and security. And then, the optimistic outcome from that is that the regulators then will also be able to properly balance the need for innovation and regulation because both are necessary for the industry to thrive.
Right. I kind of I do agree with what you're saying, and obviously education is a key part and key component for the policymakers to be able to create relevant policies. But then again, like I would like to ask you, which country or which nation do you think is doing a better job in that space in terms of creating relevant policies for the space?
Well, as with all things digital, at least in the last couple decades, the European
Hmm.
Union has been relatively forward on that. Where they have the new MiCA regulations, so I think that's a positive step. I'm in no way, shape, or form an expert on regulations, but that is
Right,
definitely the consensus is that this is a positive development for
right,
a regulatory body to have kind of forward-thinking regulations for crypto assets. So
yeah,
again, European Union, they were the kind of also at the forefront of
yeah. They were
regulation
the
for the internet.
pioneers.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so once again, they're positioning themselves there. And then you also have, Singapore is,
Hmm.
being very forward thinking as well.
Hmm.
Um, so these are kind of the two primary leaders right now, I would say. And I would just imagine that more than likely it's going to play out in a similar way as kind of data and
Hmm.
internet generally,
Yeah.
where you'll have a big enough body like the EU who's going to set rules. These will
And people will
generally
just
be
kind of
kind of
follow. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, because it's a big enough market and they're
Hmm.
strict enough, though fair enough, but strict enough that okay, you abide by the EU and you kind of de facto abide by, most other markets in the world, and they
Right.
become the de facto standard.
Right. Yeah. I think I concur there. And as you mentioned, they were the front runners with the internet as well and with data privacy and whatnot. So I do feel that Micah is probably, it has stood the test of time, so to say, even though it's not been a very long time. And people are looking at it as a bedrock on which to create further policy. So I agree there as well with you.
Yeah, and just as importantly, I think it signals that those regulators are taking the industry seriously
Seriously.
and
Yeah, it gives
but
credibility. Yeah.
exactly. And it also appears that, MiCA itself is an honest effort at fair regulation.
Hmm.
It's not only for show. And
Right,
so,
right.
when something like that happens, I think the bulk of the blockchain industry are happy and willing to engage. Of course, version one is can't be perfect, but it's a starting point that, then conversations can be had and can be adjusted and et cetera. And this is what I think most of us want to see.
Right. Okay, this has been very insightful. Now, coming back to on-chain, can you tell us a little about perhaps the next big milestone? You guys are already doing wonderfully well. And, I asked you about your token and everything so that the listeners get an overview. But obviously, you've been around for a while and I knew a few guys. But considering you're at this big at this moment, are there still, like, as an entrepreneur, I would love to know, are there still like bigger milestones that really excite you, and what would be that bigger milestone for one chain perhaps in this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, Wenchain's doing very well. Most of our
Hmm.
products are essentially operating at all-time highs, even through the bear market. So we've experienced continued growth there. So that was really good to see. In the immediate future, we are going to soon be launching a new cross-chain message passing protocol. So
Okay.
this is just kind of one step closer to just purely transferring kind of arbitrary data from
Hmm.
one blockchain to another. Here, we'll be very excited, once we roll this out to non-EVMs as well. Today's cross-chain message passing protocols are not all, but generally, only EVM, and then definitely a couple of support Solana because it's so popular. But we
Yeah.
want them to as many non-EVMs as possible as well. So that's something that we are definitely working on. And then a theme for us, both for the rest of this year and moving forward, internally, we've just been calling it the unification. So basically, right now, OneChain has all sorts of different products. We have the blockchain layer one, we have our own coin and all this type of stuff. And some of these have not been properly integrated with one another. So that's really something that we're focusing on this year so that each one of these products that we offer is creating value for the users of all the products that we offer. A simple example of this is that, okay, we'll be introducing an upgraded kind of bridge fee solution. And these bridge fees will all be converted to the WAN coin, just as a simple example. And so this will
Right.
kind of provide value for everyone that's in the WAN chain ecosystem, which
Hmm.
is a little bit of a change from what it was before. So that's kind of our upcoming milestones on the kind of, let's say, product side of things. But as always, we're extremely focused on the core infrastructure side of things. We're working on new standards with our partners right now for cross-chain message passing, um, both for EVM and on EVM. And so this type of R&D is always kind of at the forefront of what we're doing at Wenchain.
Okay, wonderful. I must ask because, Deepan has been talked about quite a bit, and, you guys are purely, your core is infrastructure. Are you looking at building, or are you already building on a decentralized physical infrastructure network as well, or is this something that is not crossed your mind as of yet?
Oh, it's definitely crossed our minds, but I think right now it's still in the research phase for us.
Okay.
And really kind of, we want to make sure that we have a full, profound understanding of it, as well as kind of reasonable projections for where it's going
Hmm.
before we fully integrate it. As a project, I think that's been around for so long. Sometimes we
Hmm.
can be a little conservative in our approach, but that's only because we're kind of obsessed with security because we're always, as I mentioned, focused core interoperability infrastructure number one always.
Hmm. Right. No, I get that, and I think like you should, because you're big enough, and any kind of a small ripple from your end can create huge waves because you have so many users and people building and utilizing your tools. So obviously, you need to be careful about that. But I just wanted to sort of touch this, lest our listeners think that I haven't really gotten around to talking about things that are trending in the space. Now, coming back to trending stuff in the space, what is your take on which, or let me put it this way, what are the kind of products or niches that you think would do really well in this particular bull run? Do you have any personal favorites in terms of tools that you feel are doing incredibly well and you'd like to give them a shout out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm deeply impressed with basically everyone who's pushing forward zero knowledge proofs right now.
Hmm.
Again, this is I'm not myself a cryptographer, so it's not my area of expertise per se. Although we do have
Yeah.
cryptographers on staff. But we all I think believe that ZK tech is going to be very important for the future of blockchain as a whole. So all
Right.
the work that's being done there is very important. And then also quite interested in decentralized identity, different solutions on this side of the ledger. Um,
Hmm.
just
Okay.
because, again, I think it's somewhat tied to the regulation conversation that
Right.
we had before.
Yeah.
You know, having something that's still decentralized, but probably a combination of ZK and decentralized identity, I think will play an important role moving forward as well.
Right. I do think that the ones you mentioned, decentralized ID and zero knowledge proofs, I think this is what is going to perhaps create the next narrative in Web3, the next big narrative. So we completely concur there. Are there any tools or platforms that you want to give a shout out to that you know you utilize yourself and you feel that your users and our listeners should you know take them for a ride as well?
Yeah, no, no, I don't know if I'm totally comfortable shouting out
Sharing
specific
names.
platforms.
I'm trying to put you on the
Yeah,
spot.
yeah, I think, because like I mentioned, we like to be totally sure, but I think these are spaces to look into and then start researching yourself, as
Hmm.
if you're a user and you want to see these future trends. I think, those are the some of the keywords to throw into Google and then
Right.
you see the different projects that are working on it and then you know, I think as a industry vertical, these ones are trending upwards.
Right. Okay, so now, I would love to ask you this particular fun question. We've had a very serious conversation so far. So tell me, if you could choose one fictional character from anywhere, pop culture, books, movies, to represent blockchain industry, who would it be and why?
Okay, well, this is really on the spot. A fictional character to represent blockchain. Oh, I don't know if I'll have a good answer for whatever reason. The face that's popping up in my mind is Goku, but I think he would be an awful choice. It's probably just because Akira Toriyama recently passed away, so he's front of mind. But yeah, on the spot, that's the face that pops to mind.
Right. Okay. So I would think that one fictional character that kind of represents blockchain industry, I would feel, you know, what once I was asking you this question, what did come to my mind was basically Mowgli. But again, I don't think that would do justice either because Mowgli has nothing to do with technology. I think I just associate that particular character with freedom, and I think I associate Web3 with freedom as well, freedom of choice and just the ethos of decentralization. So I think that was a parallel that was coming into my mind.
Well, I can at least say that your reasoning was much better than mine.
But it's my question as well. But to be fair, I had not really given it much thought. But nevertheless, I think we kind of give examples of characters that we kind of maybe resonated with. As you mentioned, the creator recently passed away. So, this was something perhaps playing at the back of your mind. So that is absolutely fine. Okay, so now another one. Tell me if there was one misconception about blockchain technology that you could perhaps really, you'd love to debunk, what would it be, and how would you like to perhaps go about clarifying it?
This I think feels more like an important question than a easy peasy one. Um, okay, I would like to debunk. It's a niche notion, I would say, but there is definitely a loud minority of people that um, do think that true decentralized interoperability is not a solvable problem.
Hmm.
Obviously, I strongly disagree. I
Right,
would
yeah.
like to debunk that. I do think the issue of scalability is a massive problem. Like I mentioned a few times on the call, we want to see the world run on blockchain.
Right,
Today, there's 8 billion people in the world, 86,000 seconds or so per day. Right now, if each person, we just give them one transaction per day, that's in excess of 90,000 TPS.
right.
Um, Ethereum does like what, 15? So,
Hmm.
one chain is clearly not going to be enough. And that's one transaction per day. If
Right,
we're running the world, we need high frequency applications. It's just a huge, huge issue.
Wow.
So for
That's a brilliant way of putting it, right? I don't think I've ever heard anybody give this sort of an analogy for the multi-chain verse. I do think that, the way you've put it, it kind of gives everybody perspective. People who keep saying that, okay, it's going to be just one chain, ultimately, they need to hear this, I think.
Yeah. And so I think it's uh it's defeatist, I think, in a way to
Yeah.
think that it's a problem that can't be solved. I think that
Yeah.
equates to let's just give up on the blockchain idea. And
Hmm.
that's not something that I'm willing to do. And I don't think it's something that most of us want to do. And so
Right.
interoperability is core infrastructure and is a problem that needs to be resolved.
Absolutely. I think you're completely right there. So you know, Nam, I think we are at the end nearly of the time that was allotted. But I would love to ask you this one question before we wrap up, which is something I ask everybody who comes on the show. If you were talking to somebody, or if you were just talking to the large populace and just the population at large of the world, and you wanted to perhaps give them a few suggestions so that they kind of are able to let go of their uh, perhaps previously held preconceived notions about the Web3 world and truly start living on blockchain, what would those suggestions be?
Number one, just start. You don't need to understand every component of the blockchain
Hmm.
ecosystem to get started.
Very,
It can
very
be,
important. Yeah.
yes, it could be an extremely daunting task, but like most things, yeah, it starts with a single step. So
Right.
I would just encourage everyone, get as far as you can right now.
Yeah.
Get a wallet, figure out how to install it. If that's all you manage to do, that's good enough.
Yeah.
But just start interacting with it because this is the future, or at least it's the seeds that will sprout the future. And so the earlier you can kind of get involved and become familiar with it, the better. So just start.
Yeah, I think that is a good suggestion because I feel a lot of people are deterred by the fact they feel they don't understand it completely. But here we are, you've been in the space for more than a decade, and so have I, and I feel like I'm still learning, and every day is a learning. And if I would have just waited for to understand everything, then I would still be waiting. And there is no better time than now. Just get involved. You owe it to yourself and your future to learn about this technology, lest you be left behind. And you must do it. You can just start small and don't be deterred by the narrative that this is just for the nerds and the techies.
Absolutely. And stay away from the headlines.
Yeah,
It'll just
absolutely.
scare you. Just start on your own and get as far as you can, and that's a good first step.
Yeah, just start on your own, do your research, stay away from the headlines, and don't fall for quick money making scams. You hear quick money, just move in the other direction, I feel.
Yes, if anyone's offering you huge yields that you
Yeah,
can't get in the quote unquote off-chain world or the real world, that's not where you start. Uh,
absolutely.
so avoid that. And I would also say anyone that is positioning any kind of singular solutions. This
Hmm.
is the one and only. You can also
Yeah,
avoid that
yeah,
um, because that's really not the ethos of blockchain of decentralization. Um, at that point, if we're going to have these one and only solutions, then again, we don't need blockchain to do that.
yeah, absolutely. I think that is very, very true. The entire idea of creating the space or one of the ethos behind the space is not just the decentralization aspect, but keeping it open source, having perhaps multiple solutions to a similar problem and working, towards a better future together. So that's how I see this. And thank you once again, Temujin, for making the time to speak to me today. Before we wrap up, any last words?
No, I'd just like to thank you again for the opportunity. I had a blast and a really good time talking about this with you.
Thank you so much. Likewise. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.